Hey everyone, in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about how to cook, alright? I'm going to give you and share with you a real simple outline, just how to cook, okay? So the first one is just to go ahead and find a recipe. Now, obviously, this is optional, of course, but it is recommended route if you're just starting out learning how to cook, okay? Now, unfortunately, not all recipes are created equal, okay? Some recipes don't break things down well for beginners, so you have to have a little cooking experience. So I recommend going ahead and finding a recipe that breaks things down step by step for you, especially if you're just getting started, all right? Go ahead and get recipes from friends and families for dishes that you've tried and loved. Now, the benefit of doing this is that if you don't understand something in the recipe, you can always just call them and ask. And if you look online, you can choose recipes that have received good reviews or comments. All right. Look for dishes that you've tried previously. All right. Perhaps it was made by a friend, or you saw a dish that you like while you were eating at a restaurant, so that you may be able to appreciate the flavor to judge the finer nuances of the dish. Okay. The next one is gather the ingredients for the job. All right, the ingredients and tools. If you're just starting out to cook, don't substitute. All right, the ingredients might interact in a way that you are not aware of, and substituting what you think is a similar ingredient might ruin the entire meal. Okay, wait until you have more experience with cooking before you do this. The next thing is when you become more experienced, all right, you have a better idea for predicting and introducing different ingredients. All right. Now, the next thing is to gather ingredients and tools for the job. The practice of getting all your tools and ingredients together, prepared and measured, is called the mise en place. Okay, and this is called by professionals and chefs, and it's considered essential to efficient cooking. All right. Now, you should always have all your ingredients and tools ready prior to cooking anything. All right, so have everything out and ready for you. Okay. Make sure you wash and clean the food. Most food needs to be cleaned somehow, and usually just rinsing it with water will do the job, all right? Foods that are peeled should be washed before peeling to decrease the chance of transferring, any chemicals or dirt from the unpeeled area to the peeled area. Okay? Cut the food into uniform slices or pieces so that they cook evenly, all right? There are a wide variety of cutting techniques: chopping, dicing, cubing, slicing, julienning, etc. All right. The bigger the pieces, the longer they'll take to cook. So, to cut down your cooking time, cut down the food you're making and make it into smaller portions. All right. To complicate things even further for you, some types of food cook faster than others. Since zucchini cooks faster than carrot, for example, you might want to cut the carrot into smaller pieces if they're going to be thrown in the same time, all right? So they're both finished cooking around the same time. Because what happens is if you cook one thing, it gets done, and you're waiting for the other thing to finish cooking, the other food gets cold. And you don't want that. You want all the foods kind of to have the same temperature so it tastes just as great, okay? Add certain ingredients like salt and pepper and marinade stuff, okay? And it's going to add the taste. Any number of herbs or spices can be used to increase the flavor of whatever you're cooking. These may need to be added before or after you're cooking. It really just depends on what you're cooking. Just be sure to add a little rather than too much. You can always add more later. Okay? Be especially careful with salt, alright? It is very difficult to fix a dish that is too salty. So sprinkle a little bit of salt on there. If you feel it needs more, just add a little more and keep going until you kind of hit the right amount. Just don't pour it all on there at once, okay? Now, ferment. This is not recommended for beginners, alright? This type of process is complicated technique and it can result in wonderful baked goods, but it's domain of experience, okay? So it's for more experienced or at least intermediate cooks who understand how to control and direct this biological process, okay? You need to be exact with baking or until you understand how each ingredient and method works. Then you can switch around to add your own taste, especially since what goes in the oven can't be added to. Okay? Now, preheat as needed. There's some small details in the step that are often overlooked. All right? Heat the water Poaching, simmering, and boiling are all slightly different techniques. Poaching is very gentle, reserved for delicate foods like eggs, fish, and fruit. Simmering is a little hotter, with a few small bubbles rising to the surface, and is often used for items that need a long time to cook. Boiling is when the water gets as hot as it's going to get and begins to evaporate into steam. The exact temperature varies by altitude. So be mindful of this if you're in a high altitude area. Get the water, get the water to whichever state the recipe calls for and keep it there. Don't replace the lid on the pot if you're poaching or simmering because the heat may increase to a boil. Remove from heat if necessary if the water starts to get too hot. All right? Preheat the oven. Don't get impatient or else you will most likely throw off your cooking time since recipes written assuming the oven is preheated. It usually takes about 15 minutes to get to 350 or 176 Celsius, but every stove is different. Some models will beep or make a noise when the temperature is reached. Otherwise, you might need to calibrate your oven to determine how long it takes for it to preheat to a certain temperature. Put a thermometer in the center of the rack and set it in the middle of the oven and turn it to the desired temperature. After 10 minutes, check the thermometer every 5 minutes until its desired temperature is reached and remember how long it took to get there, right? So it kind of saves you the whole process for next time. Okay? Heat the pan before adding oil. Heating the pan alone causes the metal to expand, opening up tiny scratches so that the oil can get in there, right? Also, if you add oil to a pan that is already hot, it'll get hotter faster, which gives it less time to break down. After you add the oil, cover the entire pan, wait for it to start smoking before adding the food. Alright? If you toss your food in before the oil is heated sufficiently, it'll soak up the oil rather than cooking it. This applies to butter as well, alright? Butter will brown slightly once hot enough and get a nice nutty smell. But don't let the oil or butter burn. Keep in mind that butter and olive oil burn faster than other oils. Okay? Keep an eye out on the pan. Alright? If it overheats and catches on fire, turn the burner off and cover the pan completely with a metal lid, damp tea towel or a fire blanket, or smother it with baking soda. Never throw water on burning oil and don't use a fire extinguisher. Both can make the fire spread, okay? Leave it for at least a half an hour to cool. Don't mess with it. Okay? Start cooking with water, boiling, poaching, simmering, stewing, to name an approachable few, alright? It's easier because you have a greater window of opportunity to when the food is done. If you cook the food for little or too long, the result is usually still editable, alright? Whereas if you miss that narrow window of opportunity with other techniques, frying, roasting, baking, you could end up with a ruined, burnt piece of food, perhaps raw in the middle, and that's inedible, okay? So pretty much, it's a lot easier to start off cooking with boiling stuff, okay? So you can start with noodles, pasta, okay? You can grill with the frying, okay? You want to start off with something small because it's a lot easier to make mistakes that way and learn from them and pick up from your mistakes, whereas to where you're cooking in the oven, you burn something and it's done for, okay? So start off with water-based cooking until you get a feel for judging when various types of food are done. For instance, just learn how to boil, poach, simmer, and stew broccoli until you know exactly how a perfectly cooked head of broccoli feels when you stick your fork into it, alright? These are just basic fundamentals that will help you throughout your cooking. Okay? Now you can move on to dry cooking. This includes grilling, roasting, toasting, broiling, and baking. Now that you know what certain foods feel like when they're cooked, you need to be able to control the cooking process with your application of heat. This is really where you need to be attentive and patient. If you apply too much heat, the food will burn. If you apply too little, the food will be raw. Okay, so when you're first starting out with dry cooking, turn off the TV, get off of the cell phone. Just focus your attention and efforts on cooking until you get a feel for how things are done, how long things take, and do you really feel that you have a grasp on things. Okay. When you arrange the food in relation to the heat source, center it so that all the food gets cooked evenly. Rotate it in the middle of the cooking process if you must. Now, try to minimize the opening of the oven door or grill cover as this lets heat escape and will make the cooking take longer, and it may also interfere with the cooking process in some other ways. Now, if you have a recipe, follow the directions exactly, okay? And allow the oven to preheat completely. Turn the heat up or down when it says to, and pay very close attention to your timer. If you don't have a recipe to start off with, okay, start with a low amount of heat and see how long the food takes to cook. Next time, add a little more heat and see how long it takes to cook. Repeat until you determine the maximum heat the food needs to cook in the shortest time without burning. Now, typically, you heat the oven or you preheat the oven to between 350 and 450. If you're just starting off, I would recommend preheating the oven to 350. Okay? Now, you can advance to frying unless you're on a diet, which in that case is not a good idea, right? If if you do want to master this technique though, it can produce amazing results, okay? And they're very easy. You can get a very good taste when you learn how to fry stuff, right? Now, frying is a little bit more difficult than cooking with water or in the oven because you need to juggle timing, heat, flipping, and stirring, okay? So it's kind of a process, all right? Lower the food carefully into the oil. You don't want to drop it in there because if you drop it in, it's going to splash up and burn you. Use tongs or a wired basket to pick up the food out of the oil. You don't want to put any plastic in there or anything. Okay, if you're sauteing or stir frying, use a non-stick pan to prevent the food from becoming one with the pan. So you don't want the food to get burned, all right? Pour just a thin layer of oil. Just go ahead and pour it onto a spoon and then pour it into the pan. Sometimes the oil comes out of the bottle faster than we'd like to, okay? So the hotter the oil, remember, the hotter the oil, the more you'll need to stir whatever you're frying so that it doesn't burn or stick. If it's shallow frying, in which 1/3 or 1/2 of the food is immersed in the oil is typically used only once. If you're deep frying, however, you may be able to use the oil more than once, and that really just depends on you. Okay. Now, if you're ready to learn how to cook meals like popular restaurants do, follow the link in the description. You're going to learn step by step how to create professional meals at home, regardless of your experience. You're also going to get step by step recipes all broken down for you so everything is easy to follow. So go ahead and click on the link in the description below and get started and have fun cooking and make delicious meals.